Hello people, welcome back to the podcast. You're probably used to these intros by now. They don't make much sense. They don't tell you what you're about to listen to because the host himself never remembers. You're probably getting quite used to that, but I do feel they give some sort of friendly, nice vibe to the podcast before we get into the conversation. You get to know me a little bit. You might have came from somewhere else, and you get to, see my vibe and who I am, and ultimately I would like you to listen to other episodes. So that's the whole sort of point in them. You don't get thrown into the deep end of the conversation. Anyway, Kerri is a dietitian. We speak about her experiences of working in the NHS as a dietitian, then transitioning to being a PT and a dietitian, but on her own terms. The thing I like about Kerri the most is she has very similar outlooks to me, but obviously much more well versed in terms of nutrition. So I kind of used this as an actual experiment of throwing loads of questions to her about things I sort of know the answers to, but I don't quite understand how to explain it to maybe a client or to my audience. And the good thing about Kerri is she uses words mere peasants like me and probably you. Let's be honest, you're a peasant. If I dropped £2, you would pick it up. You wouldn't tell me you picked it up and you would put it in your pocket. That's the type of audience I have. I know it. You wouldn't even tell me. And it's my £2. You owe me. I'll set up a GoFundMe and you can give me it back, right? But anyway, she explains things in such a simple way that anyone can understand. And that's when you know someone is intelligent and good at their job. They don't try to use words to confuse you. They just actually explain it as if you're 5 years old. And you have to have a certain level of intelligence and understanding of a topic to be able to do that. If someone is trying to sound really intelligent, it's because they probably don't know what they're talking about, or they're trying to sound smarter than what they are. Maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better. Anyway, enjoy the show. For someone who's worked in the NHS for 10 years, what's your thoughts on the whole Russell Brand situation?
Oh, I'm not going to lie, I've probably tried to kind of stay away from some of it over the last couple of days, but I think it's been hard to miss. But I don't know. I think I have issues probably with the media since probably COVID, and I've say this to actually so many people just now that I think I can't watch the news anymore. I think because every day during COVID, when I was having to work in the hospitals, I was coming home and like glued to the screen, and now that I think it just seems to pass from one big story to the next. And I'm not saying that obviously it's a huge bunch of allegations that are getting made, but I don't know. It's tricky. I think that it needs to be dealt with very appropriately. And I think even though that I think we need to remember what people are still coming out with big accusations here. And I think we need to tread the water really carefully and stuff.
Planted on the fence. I'm the same.
It's so difficult.
I had the same feeling with the news during COVID, and so I'd moved back from Australia straight into the second lockdown.
Yeah.
And me and my dad would have a daily argument about, like, I would just switch the news off and he'd switch it back on, and then I would like maybe go out a walk and come back and he'd be like distraught and like in distress, and they'd be talking about like lockdown maybe not ending for like 4 months, and I'd be like, we need to know this stuff. And I was like, I will know. I won't be allowed. The shop won't be open. The pub won't be like, do you know what I mean? I was like, I'll know. I don't need to hear about it all day.
I know.
So I would switch off and he'd go, no, we need to know. And I'm like, fucking don't.
I think, it got to the point, I think, where, I don't know, I'd maybe come home and chuck the news on with my dinner and stuff, like pre-COVID. And then I think because I came home and we were having to deal with the issues of COVID so relentlessly every day, that I think coming home and seeing what other countries were experiencing, hearing death rates and whatever else, it was
the
totally
death rates
triggering me.
And I remember hearing other people talking about it, that they would choose the most shocking death rate from whichever country it was, not just giving you the stats, because they just were trying to keep your
know.
interest as well. I think with the Russell Brand thing, if I'm honest, what kind of scares me is like my visceral reaction is like hoping that he's innocent. And I think a lot of people just react on that, but I'm open to him. Like, but like my visceral feeling is probably because I'm a male going, I hope he, like I liked him, but
I know.
And then I watched some of it and I was like, oh, there could be room here, but then I don't know.
I think it's tricky. Whatever we get told in the media, we're only going to get half the story. And I think the tricky thing is that he has obviously had a background of things that he's been so open about, which I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. And I think the frustrating thing,
maybe covering, but you don't know.
I don't know, or the fact that it's difficult. But I think just now he's definitely maybe a 50-50 kind of person. Some people love him, some people hate him, and I think that's a tricky thing, that the news is only ever going to give us the downside of, you know, both aspects of whether it's the accusations that are getting made or whether it's on Russell Brand himself. That most of the time I'm just like, no, I can't deal with it.
I know I'm talking about it on a podcast, but see, in general, I try to avoid these conversations like any of the movements, even like the Black Lives Matter thing, when people were like, I do post a black square, and I'm like, mate, leave me alone. Like, all you want to do is have it, like, people just want to have a intense argument. They've got their opinion, and all they want to do is shout their opinion at you, and I'm just like, mate, I don't want to do this. It doesn't feel nice. Any of those sort of, and it doesn't feel like you're trying to have a conversation and see each other's point of view. You're just trying to get me to have the same point of view as you. I don't like debates. I know. It's like politics. That's why I don't like watching it, because it's not actually like how do we make things better. It's even a lot of like coaches do it as well. It's like, no, your approach is wrong, and it's like, why are we debating this? I had this conversation, so I think I told this in a podcast, right? A guy made so I'll go into it. So he commented twice, and he might listen to this, I don't know if he will, but he'd clearly just took a dislike to my videos. But he just went, I don't like this guy anymore, and I think he'd like me at one point. And I think I was just making the argument that I think people should maybe prioritize weights over cardio at the start. And like, I wasn't bashing any of them. I wasn't saying don't do any of them. I was like, I maybe think you might see a bit quicker result, or like you might see results, and it might spark you to do some sort of exercise. And he was like, why are you bashing cardio so much? And then I ignored the first two, and then he said something, and then I went on his profile, and it was all CrossFit stuff, and I went like that, oh, makes sense, you're a CrossFit gimp. And by the way,
you hear?
I've been to CrossFit like 5 times, and I think in like a year or two I'll probably transfer over to CrossFit. I was just getting bored of him digs at me, so I just chose the easiest dig back, and then he made a full 2-minute video about me. And he, like no offense to me, took everything I've ever said out of context. And but I messaged him, I was like, mate, I don't care about any of this. I was like, I'm not gonna put it on my story and say and back myself up or anything. And I was like, if me and you were sitting next to each other, we have the same goal, and you just have, and like, honestly, if you spoke to me about like my thoughts on cardio, they're probably very similar to yours. We don't need to argue about it.
Do you know what I think? It's a lot to do with like the kind of fitness world, though, that it's so like overly saturated. Like there's so many people trying to make their way in the fitness industry that I think if you are either, I don't know, maybe seen as a threat, or I don't know, looking for someone to be maybe controversial to start that argument, that's often where, I don't know, on social media trends come up and whatever else that people start slating someone else, sharing it, all this kind of stuff. And sometimes I think it's almost like clickbait.
Yeah, it's like drama gets views into it.
And I think that's a tricky thing, probably I guess more with fitness industry maybe, but nutrition spaces like that as well, where people are just, I think probably I post more nutrition stuff because that's like my main area, but the number of, everyone has an opinion on nutrition. So even though people are obviously entitled to have their opinion on things and on food and whatever else, I think when you, for example, I'm sure we'll go on to talking about it, but things like carbs and whatever else, that is such an emotive topic for so many people that if I have ever posted things on carbs and stuff before, I would get a lot of stick in comments. But for me, I'm just like, I'm sharing what evidence and information I can give you so that you can make more informed choices about your health. If comments and stuff are in there, I just try not try and not interact with them and stuff, because I'm like, at the end of the day, you can take the information as you want and then do with it as you will.
One of the biggest lessons I've learned is it never ever feels good to reply to those comments.
Oh, no.
That was I hadn't done it in like 6 months, but you've doing my head in. So I just called him a CrossFit gimp, and then I got a 2-minute video made about me. I was like, learned the lesson.
Yeah, it's tricky though, but I think especially if someone's almost doing it to you a couple of times, then I can understand it. But yeah,
that's why I just make mental videos about it now, where I lose my mind. that's my reply now. I've wrote down like 5 like proper like skits with like comments people were giving me, and I'm like, I need to stop doing
this. That's probably good content strategy planning and stuff though, just feeding off what
I don't like argue with them. I just take the utter piss out of it, because that's the only thing that's the only like positive thing I can feel like I can get from it. So you're a dietitian, and you were saying, because obviously I've heard the wild stories about nurses and doctors through COVID. What effect did it have on dietitians? So I don't really understand how your day-to-day job would look like as a dietitian with the NHS. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess it depends on maybe what area of the NHS and stuff that you go into. So I've largely worked in the acute setting and things for the last 10 years, which means working in hospitals and stuff like that. Communities, obviously, when you go into people's homes, you probably do more clinics and things, you know, maybe in GP surgeries and stuff like that, or go into nursing homes and things like that. So probably from my own experience, the area that I was working in at that point, I had worked for however many years in surgery and critical care, and then I'd taken a job probably, was it maybe a year before COVID, as I moved up to Glasgow back into doing stroke and kind of elderly rehabilitation at that point. And it was, whenever COVID hit, because there was obviously such a big pull on ICUs and all of that because of the nature of the patients that we were getting in, anyone who had previous ICU experience got drafted in to cover the ICUs at that point. And it was, that bit I think was scary, even though I felt as if I knew what I was doing in the ICU space. I think we were, in some way I felt slightly because at that point I was fortunate that I hadn't had COVID or anything at that point, and you still didn't know what you were dealing with. But I think seeing the number of people that were sadly coming through the ICU units being so horrendously unwell with it, that was when I would say that I had definite like health anxiety overall over that time of just coming in every day and seeing the number of patients getting admitted, the number of patients that were sadly passing away, and it was just brutal. So I think, I'm trying to think how many months that I had to get drafted back into doing that. I don't know, maybe 6 months or something thereabouts, and then I'm sure I got moved back into kind of my substantive post at that point. But I was kind of, in some way, half fortunate that the way that we documented notes, for example, for the ICU space was everything's online. So because at that point when you went into ICU, because of all the ventilation and things, you had to get put in like the big hazmat suits, which, because for example, I would go in and my role with someone in ICU was to give them nutrition through a tube in their nose and calculate the requirements, work out how much they would need in order to help them when they obviously can't eat themselves. And because it wouldn't be me that would actually be hanging up the feed, it would be nursing staff that were doing it. We were seen as people that maybe didn't need to enter the ward or didn't need to take up PPE at that point. So we were, I would say, in some way slightly protected, that I could phone the ward and say, look, I've assessed this person online, because all the notes and stuff are online. I could see that from my office at that point, phone and then make a prescription for someone online and just stay in the office, which I would say in some way was fortunate. But then when I got drafted back into my substantive post at that point, all the notes were on the wards, so that was us going onto the wards and stuff at that point, and dealing with COVID and things kind of more on a face. What
are you giving someone through a tube? So this is people that are in like critical care.
Yeah, so it would be like, it's liquid feed that's kind of made up, and we would the makeup of it depends on the person, so it's like almost like pre-made bags, but we would choose what one is most tailored to that person's like energy requirements, protein requirements, things like vitamins and minerals and stuff that are through it, to try and make their intake at that point when they can't eat themselves as nutritionally complete as it can be, to make sure that they obviously come out of ICU, or whether it's even someone on the ward, for example, who's had a stroke and they can't swallow properly, they sometimes need tube feeding for a period of time to make sure that they've got the energy coming into them to go over their stroke. And so it's kind of like liquid feeds that hang up that we prescribe for them.
What were you doing before COVID then? like through the NHS?
So I was much the same. So in my old job, I worked at another hospital at that point that I was doing surgery and critical care, but just in another hospital, and then took the job up at the Queen Elizabeth I was at that point, in stroke and care of the elderly, and then got drafted back into doing ICU and critical care kind of around COVID time.
So that's a lot different to the kind of job you're doing with PTing and then being a dietitian. So how does your life look now? Do you kind of use your dietitian stuff? Do you use that as much with PTing?
Yeah, so kind of since I was doing, throughout my kind of NHS life, I'd always, when I graduated, whenever that was, feels like ages ago, I always had in the back of my head. What age are you, 21? If I wish, yeah. Like that. Yeah, I think when I first graduated, I'd always had this idea that I've always been into sport and exercise, always had this big goal that I wanted to work in, like with athletes in some way. So I think when I finished uni, I knew that I wanted to get experience, I think, working with, I don't mean I would say the general, getting my kind of basics behind me and things, but first working with like one-to-ones in, clinic and community, or at the hospital for me at that point, and almost getting my clinical knowledge like behind me, so that I knew that if I wanted to then specialise in an area, I would have that clinical experience behind me. To then specialise in an area, you have to really in my opinion, get a good few years behind you so that you know enough about the kind of general population that you might generally see before you then specialise in one particular thing. So I worked for a few years and then decided to go back to uni, I think when I could afford it, to go back to do a postgrad in sports nutrition. And then ever since then, I'd been trying to kind of chip my way of getting into the kind of sports area. Mm-hmm. And probably back then, if you'd asked me, my dream goal was to get in with like the Institute of Sport or work with a club or something like that. But I don't know if other folk in Scotland would agree, but I think the world of sport is really, really small up here. And I can admit that I personally found it really hard to kind of break my way into it. As dietitians, or for example, like performance nutritionists, and like,
do you thinking like a dream job would be like working with a football team or like that sort of,
yeah, at that point it was any, but my opinion's kind of changed.
I think that's quite common, isn't it? So I've got like a physio friend, and I think she works now for the Institute of Sport, but she found it very difficult because like all the jobs in England were way more promising, so she was contemplating going down there and stuff.
Exact same boat. And I think
not enough money up here as well.
Yeah, and I think the trick is weird. Even though I would say that you give more of your life to sport, if you work in that area, the amount that you would actually get paid was much less than what I was getting paid in my NHS job. So it didn't really, from that point of view, it didn't seem to kind of weigh itself up. So yeah, I chipped away for what feels like years of trying to like approach clubs. I would maybe get asked again to do talks or seminars or something like that. But annoyingly, in comparison to like a physio, we're not seen as like an essential part of their of like the coaching staff, if that makes sense. Like a football team doesn't necessarily need to have a dietitian or performance nutritionist in it, whereas they need to have a physio, they obviously need to have a head coach, all that kind of stuff. So you would often get taken on for short periods of time of coming in to just do workshops or something like that, and then they wouldn't want to take you on a full-time basis, which is frustrating. But I think it's only kind of high, like top, elite clubs and stuff like Rangers, Celtic, I don't know, that probably have the money to then afford someone like full time, and it's often about who you know.
There's 2 jobs available in the country, basically.
Yeah, so it's hard. It's just a bit of a, I don't know. That sounds maybe like woe is me, but I think
I've heard that a lot.
It's
I've
tricky.
heard that. The Scottish. Football is the biggest sport, and there's not a lot of money in football here. So imagine all the other sports.
Yeah, and I think I would have been open to like even going into, I don't know, like rugby. I've got a background kind of athletics of interest of my own. I would have loved to have got into that. But
what kind of athletics?
Just maybe like track and field stuff I would love to go into. But I think it was just, I felt like I was kind of like fighting a losing battle, and it's dietetics in particular is like so small, and quite often in the field of sport as well, you're often taken on with like the current manager of that club, and if they move, they might want to take their coaching staff with them, so your job is always like, I would say, a bit risky. Mm-hmm. So I think over the years, and I think probably during COVID or when I started kind of getting into more like coaching and stuff from a like PT point of view, it kind of made me realise that I was almost like neglecting people that I probably had a better relationship with, because I enjoyed going to the gym and stuff myself. I could see that folk weren't fueling their training appropriately and all that kind of stuff, that I was like, why am I trying so hard to try and get into like the elite areas where there's like people day to day that obviously need the support. So I was definitely that person that was thinking about moving to England at one point, and would have given up anything, but I was like, what am I
would imagine you would have plenty of interesting people that are willing to pay for your advice that are like not elite level athletes, but people that are probably running pretty good triathlons and stuff that would be interested, or like they have a goal of doing an Ironman or something, and that would be interesting for you. So rather than it being like big sport corporations or whatever, like having just one-to-one athletes, that's the same job you're kind of striving for, isn't it?
So that's kind of where I'd got to from, like, I would say I loved my, when I worked.
Do you have any clients like that, or have you worked with it?
So when I left the NHS back in March this year, like, that's what I was going to say, like, I loved the patient side of things in my NHS job, loved working in surgery and critical care, but I just knew that it kind of wasn't feeling my fire. There's always this background in me that my end goal was always to try and work in sports at some point. But I think I had just kind of almost lost my way, that I couldn't see how to do it. And then I think as I got into, like I said, coaching and stuff, that was when I was like, oh, this is kind of where I'm maybe like I'm needing to be. So yeah, I kind of decided to take the leap of faith out of the NHS back in March, and that's kind of the area that I'm trying to delve into now. So still early days, kind of 6 months into it now, but I work in a clinic on a Monday, and that's kind of where I'm trying to see folk more from like a one-to-one that needs to come in for like a full dietetic assessment. And then obviously there's a limit, or I guess like a space that I can help my own PT clients and things with their nutrition.
How does a dietetic assessment look?
So I would say it goes in a lot more in depth, and I think that's sometimes that I need to, what I often remind my own PT clients that I take on is that I think some people, I don't know, maybe find me on social media and know that I'm a dietitian and things, and think, oh, I'm going to be able to almost get like 2 for 1, which there's obviously and you'll know this as well, there's a huge part from a personal trainer point of view that I can assist someone with their intake. But if I was to do a dietetic assessment, I need to really get someone in technically for an hour appointment and sit them down, do a full assessment on social history, past medical history and whatever else. So I'm assuming you've probably came across it yourself, that a lot of people come into potentially the fitness world and probably ask a lot about, I don't know, gut related symptoms for different things and things that might be impacting on their dietary intake, that I know if I just went to do my PT course and hadn't done anything else, I wouldn't really be able to offer that information to, if that makes sense. I wouldn't
touch anything like that.
So I think there's an element of me that I know that I can give a lot of support to them, but there's an element that I need to say, look, if you need any more support, then I'm going to need to try and see you in clinic, because that isn't the appropriate space. And also even from like a registration point of view, I need to make sure that the same way as if you went to a GP, they would document all your notes. I need to do the same thing, that in case, you know, from a protection point of view, that's kind of where it comes from. Like,
I even find the gym floor is not the place to talk about food.
Nah. But do you not think that's a really difficult thing being a PT, is that if you only see, for example, a client once or twice a week, I think you're trying to do so much for them, of, you know, trying to coach them obviously in the first place, but you might be that first port of call for them.
It's a hard job.
I
don't think people will like realize how, like, it's very emotionally draining.
Yeah.
Like, because you're taking on most people's problems, and you're also, that's why the better you get at it is actually the less you try give people, if you know what I mean. Like, so try to get them to focus on way less different things at once and just do one thing at a time. Like, try to get them just to lift, and then be like, right, we will fix food, but let's just lift first. And then like it becomes like that, rather than being like, at the start you're like, fix food, I know. We're gonna fix everything. Gonna walk out here in 2 weeks, a new woman. I know. You'll understand everything, and then they just
and
leave.
Then you won't need me anymore.
And they just go, fuck this guy.
It's I think as well, when you start out, you almost think that you want to. I think when you get someone in initially, you probably think that they've come in with the motivation at that point that you want to be like, okay, we can do X, Y, and Z. But I would say that I'm in the same opinion as you, that we need to strip it back. And there's a lot of clients that would come in when I do like initial consultations with them, saying they want support with diet and exercise, and I'm like, fine, but obviously the main reason you're contacting me just now is to come in and, you know, hopefully feel fitter and stronger, and let's focus on that first. Let's see if we can get you, you know, consistently training however many times a week suits you, and then over time, this is where we then think, what other habit can we then, you know, obviously start integrating? Is it, you know, looking at your nutritional intake? And
give me your honest answer to this, right? So we probably have quite similar approaches in terms of like, we're just trying to get people doing things a bit better, and it's not being and like, even if people want weight loss, a lot of the times I'm trying to almost convince them out of that at the start. And then I'm like, once I teach you like just how to like look after yourself a bit, like we can do weight loss. But I don't want to get you to that, because if I go to you, right, what's the last 3 years look like? And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm always on a diet, and then I'm always putting it back on. I'm like, we need to get away from that for a while. But how many coaches do you think, just say a percentage, just say Glasgow, right? What percentage of coaches do you think are like that?
I think if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said well over 50% would have been like striving for this weight loss goal, trying to get your progress pictures and stuff like that, because that was the clickbait again to get folk into their, you know, their business, which there's an element of it that I understand, but I think it's getting better. I think there's a huge, even from a nutrition point of view, I think there's a big shift that's kind of happening just now, of where there are so many people trying to shout a bit louder about why you should be doing exercise for more than just trying to lose weight, because it is about, so it should be about so much more than that. And I think if you go in with that mindset of thinking, I'm just going to go in to try and see if the number shifts on the scales, or, you know, from an aesthetic point of view, how long are you realistically going to stick to it? And you're probably going to find it soul destroying when you do it. So a lot of the time that I speak to clients, I say, try and think of exercise as something that you know, have the opportunity to add to your life, and it should add to your life as opposed to like depleting it all the time. Same when it comes to nutrition. So I think it's getting better, but I would say there's still quite a bit of work to do. Tentative answer.
On defense.
Why, what's your opinion?
Oh, it's getting better.
Yeah.
It's definitely getting better. Sometimes I just need to like clients will tell me what their last PT's done. I'm like, just don't tell me.
Yeah, nervous twitch. Yep.
Yeah, I don't want to get meal plan. How much? 1,200? No, I don't want to hear it. And then they'll be like, oh, I was booked in for a photo shoot, and I'm like, why?
I know.
Why are you in for what is this photo shoot stuff about? I don't get it.
That's when it comes down, again, in my opinion, and it's not to slay
We're
anyone.
doing one straight after, by the way, in there.
But yeah, I think that's where I then think, if you're getting someone in to have a progress photo at the end of it, who's that actually for? Is it for the PT client? Maybe to like a certain extent. Is it more actually trying to get someone else into your business after they've stopped? And what's the maintenance after that? Have you actually taught the client anything at all about how to maintain that? Yeah, it's
very, very, very rarely. Like, they reverse dieted me up to 1,700 calories. Yeah. I'm like,
I know.
Why? So it's so terrifying. I find that really scary.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm of the opinion that people have the wrong goal at the start, and that's half the problem.
Yeah.
So like when they go to a PT, they tell them their goal, and they go, right, cool, let's do that. And I'm like, but that's not what's good for them.
I know.
And I know that from experience. So like that's what I done my full childhood.
Yeah.
And like my teenage years, until I didn't learn until I was like 23. Yeah. I would just be like, right, I need to be way less. So my goal was always just way less.
Yeah.
And I just would fuck you up.
Yeah. I would say, even I've been quite open about this as well, if I didn't go to uni, I would wonder what my relationship with food and exercise was like. I think as I went into high school, and then I think when there's that pressure at that point about how you look, and I mean, obviously guys get it as well. I think females have just got this.
It's worse for women.
It's so hard. And I always constantly remember thinking I had to try and strive to get abs at one point, strive to be like, always stay a size 8, you know, and if I was getting a size up in clothes, I'd be like, oh my God. And I remember going through a phase of constantly weighing myself, and it was brutal. And it was so, one thing I always speak to clients about as well is think about your weight on the scales of just being your relationship with gravity. And that was one comment that I don't know where I read it.
I've heard that before.
And I just think you're so right. Like, why is this number dictating my mood for the day, when really it has, I mean, don't get me wrong, it has its place in certain contexts and things, but for the most part, I would say for the recreational everyday athlete, I would be saying to them, you know, there's so many other markers that you can see your progress from that is going to make it far more rewarding. It's a horrible thing to have that.
So this is something I'd like to speak to you about. So I seen you wrote that you stopped weighing yourself, and so I don't do that with people, and I started saying that at the start.
Yeah.
So that, again, this would not be any kind of debate, because like I said before, right? Our end goal is still the same, just the way we get them there might be slightly different. So, and I think this was my lack of skills as a coach. So when I first started, people who were getting obsessed with the scale, I'd tell them to like chuck it out or whatever, but then they would get obsessed with something else.
Okay.
But it was my lack of skills as a coach to not, like, I should be explaining to them from the start that, look, maybe you won't lose, and maybe that's not the goal, to lose loads of weight, or like losing inches and stuff like that. Because people who get obsessed with the scale, if you don't communicate that to them, they will get obsessed with measurements, or
Yeah.
you get clients that'll be like, can I send you a progress picture every day? Like if they're obsessed with the scale and you take it away.
Yeah.
But it's now trying to, I think if your relationship with anything improves, so if your relationship with food or the scale or yourself or exercise improves, the rest of them all kind of improve at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's trying to improve like any of them, and then they'll all sort of improve at the
Yeah.
same time.
100%.
So it was like, and some of that comes from education.
Yeah.
So I should have been like educating people on the scale a lot more, trying that, and then if it didn't work, educating them in the same capacity about something else.
Yeah.
But that was my lack of skills as a coach.
And I think, like I was saying a second ago, there is a place for monitoring scale weight. You know, I suppose maybe in a performance like area as well. There's I don't know. There is a need for it at times, but I think for the recreational people or the people that are trying to, I guess, like you said, it's maybe switching that mindset of coming in from a health and performance point of view. And that's what I always try and bring back to people, that it's probably not going to add anything. And it might, for me, I know that it took me a while to kind of step like back from it and then actually get the confidence to finally chuck them out. But I think I really started to have that shift of, okay, I want to try and think about focusing on actually getting stronger. I don't want to actually just run on the treadmill to see how many calories that I've burned, which is what I was doing at one point, or just going out a run because I was like, oh, I want to be able to like eat more later on today, mental. And then actually once I took all of that away, I started to actually be like, man, I'm like lifting a bit heavier here, or I've managed to, I don't know, run a 5K a bit like quicker, and all that is far more rewarding, and I think keeps exercise that more rewarding. And I think that was where I started to see, even if aesthetics is your goal, I think that's where you will then see aesthetic gains coming from a long-term approach of it, without you then having to think about how I actually look. It tends to come naturally because of consistency coming from a better place.
I think when I thought about answering that question, that was what I was going to propose to you. Like, were you already at that point where you'd realised all these other things before you chucked it away? So if you chucked away those scales when you were maybe like in high school or whatever, you'd have probably got obsessed with something else, I reckon. But you got to that point. Just try to, our job really is just to try get people to try the other approach. Yeah. Because like we can say this till we're blue in the face, but unless they do it themselves, they can listen to us. I think we'll encourage them to try something different, but they need to still try it. Yeah. And then we can walk them through it if they choose to work with us.
And I think I think you're right. I definitely could admit that I often like call myself a recovering perfectionist. Like I have that tendency that I'm like, yes, I'm.
Do you want to hear something funny?
Go.
I used to play FIFA when I was younger, and it would be against the computer. See if I lost a game, I would restart the season. I don't think I ever finished the season because I couldn't let anyone even draw with me. I was always Celtic. And Celtic, right? The manager would be John Mckinney, and he would just happen to look exactly like my dad. And there'd be a striker called Gavin Mckinney, and I'd be a custom player, and he would have 99 speed even though I was really fat. And it was the opposite of all my attributes. It's
funny, but I think see a lot of people as well that have that kind of tendency to, I don't know, weigh themselves, get obsessed with foods and whatever else. That is often one of the tendencies that come with it, is that perfection, or you have to have that like control around stuff. And I think it was only, like I said, maybe when I got into uni that I was like, oh my God, my approach to nutrition is like all wrong here. And I'm grateful for that, because I do wonder if I'd went on to do something else, what it would have been like. So I think I probably got caught at a good time. And it's not that I think I ever came from a space of where like my parents have always like been really great at like promoting a good relationship with foods. And I think it was just unfortunately the time of the age that I was at when I was in high school. We were obviously getting bombarded by, I don't know, magazine size 8, how skinny you could be and all that kind of stuff, that I think that was just definitely like a triggering thing for me. So yeah, I think I just caught it at a good time.
The maybe like 2000s to like 2012, some
Special
of the most.
K diet.
I done that when I was like 13. I just used to have 4 bowls. 4 bowls is... Why am I not losing weight? But I said this on a podcast the other day, like I done a solo one. You would have, see if I went into my mum's cupboard, like my old bedroom in my mum's house, there would just be notepads of like the date and what weight I was and how I was gonna lose weight, and I would never last longer than a week because I'm a perfectionist.
See, if I'm honest with you, see on an old note that I've still got on my phone, it's still there about when I would used to weigh myself like regularly, and it's scary thinking how often I used to do it, and even seeing how much it would swing from like day to day, which is normal, but it's
I have a specific memory of me. I was like, right, I'm going to weigh every day because I used to do the once a week thing. This is why I don't think I'm really, even if I tell people I do often prescribe weighing every day to people if they're working with me, but it's like, I want you like show me your weights and then I'll explain to you what's going on. So it's more of a like educational thing. Because I found no matter what system I used to weigh myself, it didn't matter. Like, because the once a week thing, I used to get anxiety from Thursday onwards because I was weighing on the Monday. Because I would want to lose 2 pounds. So even if it's 1 pound down, chocolate straight away, and I would ban myself from chocolate, crisps, and Chinese's. That's only 3 things. I'd be like, I can't have them. Chocolate, crisps, no chance. And no matter what way, and then I tried to weigh myself every day, and I remember specifically because I used to be embarrassed about weighing myself in the house. I'd weigh myself in, like, we'd lived in a flat, so I'd weigh myself out in the like hallway bit, and it went down for 3 days in a row. And the 4th day, I'd gained all of the weight back, and I just lost the plot. I was just like, I'm always going to be fat. And I remember telling myself stuff like that as well. I was just like, I'm broke.
And how sad is it that that's where your mood came from, was literally what a number says about you. And I remember I used to do it most mornings, I think, at one point, and it would totally dictate my mood for the rest of the day. It's nuts. And I think the freedom that comes from that, it's just liberating of not having that dictating it. But then, like you said, I would say that there's a place for it. So I think it's having the skill to be able to identify whether weighing someone is actually going to be a positive thing for them. So like you said, for example, weighing someone every day might be useful for someone to actually see like trends over time and maybe take an average to then see it. Or if not, sometimes it's maybe going to say, okay, at the same time every week, that's where you want to look of whether you've been to the toilet in the morning, make sure you're fat, no clothes, all that kind of stuff is where you can see trends over time. And that's probably 2 ways to do it. But I think it's going in with the approach of, is that going to be triggering for that person? And actually, do we need to be that coach that encourages them to take that step away from it and try and think about
everyone. I say to people, ideally, I'd like you to weigh like 2 or 3 times a week, but we can absolutely have a conversation about that. And some people are like, I don't want to do progress pictures, and I'm like, fine. Because I'm almost borderline. I think I'm going to make, because I get them to do it every 4 weeks. Most people don't do it, and I never chase them up about it. Like, I'm never like, where's your progress pictures? I don't need to see you like with as little clothes as possible all the time. Do you know what I mean? I don't, but I think it is helpful sometimes. But I might get people to not do it for 12 weeks now, and then be like, maybe the 12-week one, and I might even just say you can send it, or you don't have to send it. I'm kind of getting away from even, because I'm never really, the only time I've ever posted progress pictures is when I've had someone tell me I should be posting more of them. Do you know what I mean? It's a whole industry thing.
I know.
And I've probably posted people's progress like 5 times in 3 years, and I'm just like, I've came up with this idea in my head that I'm now going to do reels, because my whole thing's like form. So I don't actually brand it too much, but I've like called my coaching Learn to Lift, and it's not like a whole like thing that I'm going to start this Learn to Lift company or whatever. I just wanted to get away from it being about weight loss and be like, no, my service is actually, my whole thing is teaching you how to lift. I'll help you with food and stuff like that, but that's the main thing. And I want to like make reels that are like someone's journey from, I might get them a training here, film a few things, and then like 16 weeks down the line, like show how good the remaining deadlifters or something. And I'm going to start doing that as my thing to promote, because you need to promote your business in some way, but I'll just take longer. It's quite easy fucking post.
I know, and that's where I would say it's tricky, because again, the clients that come in occasionally to the gym are folk that are obviously going to want quick results and whatever else, and that's again the clickbait that can often come with someone looks from this to this in 6 to 8 weeks or whatever. And I get it, and I feel that it's tricky from a coaching world that's potentially how we get clients if it's their end goal. But I think, I don't know, I've probably had I think I just go from the approach of, I would, like the same as you, want to know that someone thinks from like the longevity point of view of, rather than it being aesthetics. If that comes with it, great, and that's what your goal was, fine, or one of your goals. But I want someone to come in and be like, okay, I want to try and know that I can get a bit stronger. I know that I'm going to actually be able to move well as I get older. You know, and just give them almost like an air of confidence with it, so that they come in and train and actually think, I bloody enjoyed that today. Rather than thinking that they were just training just for simply seeing weight in the scales or something like that.
I often get people to tell me their goals just so I can see how they're thinking.
Yeah.
I don't even consider them.
Mm-hmm.
People
What
know
goals?
that though.
Their goals, did you say?
Yeah, I'll get like watch like consultation form, like what's your 3 goals, and they'll be like, lose a stone. And I'll say straight away, let's not do that. I'll be like, see, if you lose 4 pounds in 12 weeks, you've got a lot stronger, you're enjoying the gym, that's class.
No.
And I would just be like explaining that. I'm like, because there's nothing wrong, like even if you lost 10 pounds, if you set that goal a stone, you're going to be disappointed even though you've done class.
Yep.
So I just kind of ask their goals to see what they're, and like most people think like that.
And I think that's a really good approach to use for it. And like you said, that if weight loss comes with it, that's like an added bonus. But for a lot of people, I think, who are trying to lose weight, they often have this idea of, okay, I need to get to X weight. But what happens actually when they get there? The majority of the time people aren't happy still then. And then what's the next, you know, and it's just that constant cycle of not ever appreciating what your body can do in the gym or, you know, feeling yourself appropriately, all that kind of stuff. And it's, I don't know, I think it's trying to think that we're not just put on this earth for like how we look. And I often say to some of my clients, like, really, at your funeral, are people going to be remembering whether you have abs or not? Probably not. And is that really what you want to strive for? Like, let's go and actually make sure that you, for the most part, eat really well, you know, train really well that actually suits you, and gets you feeling fitter and stronger. But then so that you can go and enjoy meals out with your pals and stuff, that you're not feeling guilty about it, or, you know, 'cause that's just that.
I think you want to have a freer mind with all of this. And sometimes all these goals that you think will make you happy are just trapping you in that part of your mind, and it's subconsciously you're doing it to yourself. And the deeper you get into coaching, I think our job is to like free you of that. Some coaches will just play on that and do exactly what you think you want, but then you just stay in the same. Like you can yo-yo diet with a coach, you can yo-yo diet with multiple coaches. You can just go to like 5 different coaches. You're yo-yo dieting. You're just being PT'd into yo-yo dieting. And
the reason probably someone's having to move to a new coach is because the last diet didn't work for them. Do you know? And that's why. And then really at the end of it, they've just went through this cycle of never sticking to one thing and actually seen the other benefits of it, because they've never really stuck for anything long enough that they can then maintain, or have been educated to, you know, to understand how they maintain that kind of lifestyle after.
Right, we're going to take a break. I've done this with someone before, but see, because you're pretty well qualified and there'll be stuff that I want to learn from you. I want to do like a quick fire where I'll just ask a few questions that I wouldn't really be able to answer that well. And then just doesn't have to be long-winded answers. Just try to give me a quick answer. But I'm going to go to the toilet in between. Can you explain the difference between fat burning and fat loss?
So fat burning and fat loss is often something that people get totally mixed up. Fat burning and fat loss are not the same thing at all. And I think it often comes in with things like fasted training and things. People think that they are burning body fat when they're like training fasted. But burning fat as a fuel doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be burning body fat stores. So if you're doing exercise and things fasted in the morning or something, you're going to want to, you're obviously having an overnight fast from the night before, and you have no fuel usually left on board. We've went into like our muscle and liver glycogen that we would usually use first for exercise. That it's then having to tap into what other exogenous fuel that you've got like around your body. So that's because that's the readily available fuel that it's got there, that your body's having to almost like get forced to use, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily burning fat.
Okay. As an athlete, why might it be like beneficial to eat more sort of processed carbs and sugars?
Yeah. It's often an area of sports nutrition that is that people take wrongly. So to meet higher energy demands for someone who, even recreational athletes or everyday athletes or elite athletes, there is sometimes a need for more processed foods in order to meet higher energy demands, to meet their active lifestyle, if that makes sense. So in and around exercise, we are needing to try and make sure that we fuel up with carbohydrates as much as we can, and to meet higher overall calorie intakes, it's sometimes impossible to do that from just whole foods alone. So it's not that they take up the majority of someone's intake, it's just potentially to meet higher energy needs on top of that, and processed foods are very beneficial.
Well, see, even when I tried to bulk,
Yeah.
I couldn't just get my calories in from like even just like potatoes. Try eat 500 calories of boiled potatoes and I'd be sick. Why do CrossFit promote low carb diets?
I don't know.
Like, why?
Because I think the person who's in charge of their nutrition stuff has never done any background of nutrition education. And the frustrating thing about that is that, especially CrossFit, which is such a high intensity sport, you need your glycogen or your carbohydrate stores as much as possible, because that's the kind of energy system that we use in high, particularly in high intensity. We can't convert fat quick enough to use that for a fuel in high intensity exercise. So they definitely need to get a dietitian on board.
This is not written down, but you know, you get quite a lot of athletes now that are coming out as vegan.
Yep. How
can they like make their diet work as being an athlete?
So I would definitely say that there's definitely ways to do it. I think vegetarian and vegan, there's a bit of a difference there, but you can still definitely get what you need. With vegan, you're going to need to go down with some supplement routes and things like that, some of it. And I would say,
what would you supplement?
So things like B12 and stuff that you're usually going to need that you probably can't get if you're going to be excluding meat and dairy products and things. Vegetarians, you've got a bit more of an opportunity to get in things like extra protein and stuff if you're including some dairy products and eggs and things like that. Vegan, I would say you have to just be a bit more savvy and clued up before you start excluding things. So for example, a lot of people come into clinic and things that I'm doing just now and decide to go more plant-based, which is absolutely fine, but haven't really done their research or whatever beforehand or looked into it. So are coming in with, for example, calcium deficiency and things which is impacting their bone health, and just don't know if they're technically excluding a food group, which it technically is, especially dairy as well. They're not replacing it with anything else or looking for fortified alternatives. So I would say they can definitely do it, but it would just be being smart about your nutritional intake and where you get your sources from. And vegans in particular probably might need to rely on supplements a bit more than others.
I heard that guy on a podcast say this before. I didn't like it was Stephen Bartlett.
Okay.
I don't like a lot of the thumbnails. Don't like a lot of the advice given out. But it was mad because the guy who was on the podcast, I can't remember his name, I liked 90% of what he said, and then I despised 10% of what he said. Okay. He just went off on this whole rant about Diet Coke. I was like, he had an amazing hour, and then he just went on this almost rant about a relevant rant that was just felt like clickbait, if you know what I mean. But he said something class, and I heard you say it. Why? I'm just a long-winded way of answering asking a question.
I've given you
long-winded answers. I nearly give you an essay, because basically the question is, what is the benefit of trying to get more colours in your diet, and can you explain that more?
The easiest way that I often explain to people is, if it isn't always necessarily this, but usually with more colours usually means that you get more nutrients. So when I say to someone about the old saying of getting your 5 a day, we don't want to just be eating 5 apples a day because it's going to give us the same nutrients. We want to try and eat, like cheesy as it sounds, eating a rainbow as much as we can, because usually with different fruits and vegetables we're going to get different vitamins and minerals from that, and they're one of our richest sources of a lot of vitamins and minerals that we can get in our diet. So
add dragon fruit in.
Add dragon fruit in, yeah. If you can source it. That's import it from Bali.
That was the one thing I liked about Bali. Yeah. I didn't really like a lot of Bali.
It looks cool, but I think it's kind of tasteless.
It felt like they were trying to make an Asian Marbella or something.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
It's just nice on your is it acai or acai bowl?
Yeah, but they're the one thing I picked up. I want to get dragon fruit so much. What was the most common So I imagine if people come to you
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you're a dietitian as well, they'll say similar things to me, but they'll be more thinking about like perfectionism with food. What's the most common theme that crops up?
With clients when they first start.
Yeah, like what's the most common thing they struggle with, or like they have a myth that they believe in?
I probably would say it's usually carbs.
Yeah.
I would say there's this carbs. The fear of carbs seems to always rear its ugly head in another way, whether it's like Atkins diet or keto or whatever else. It's all demonizing carbs, and I don't understand it. That's probably one of I would say the most. There's just so much misinformation about it, and if you're active, the more active you get, the more carbs you're going to need. And I think it's dispelling that of being like, if you actually want to train better and get stronger, you're going to need to get carbs in you. Like, yeah.
Is there anything people should be worried about? So saturated fats or processed sugars, is there anything you would say avoid, or would you say to people avoid anything?
I would say that there's room. So even often something that I speak to clients about is I think sometimes dietitians are given this like idea that we're like the food police, which I would hope that the majority of us aren't. And I often say to folk, if anyone tells you to cut out your favourite foods, you need to run for the bloody hills, because that's not right. Even things like chocolate cakes, biscuits, takeaways, whatever, they can form part of a healthy diet. It's the same with what you said earlier on about processed foods being part of an athlete's diet. It's how the rest of your diet is largely made up in and around that. I would say that what people need to just be mindful of is, like you said, saturated fat intake. It's choosing more unsaturated fats where possible. Watching how much added sugar is in things. So if your diet is largely made up of, foods that have a lot of added sugar in, so like things like your chocolates and stuff like that, how much of that, if they take up the majority of your dietary intake, they're obviously then making you lose out on other nutrients that you need to get from more whole foods. So I think in general, it's just being mindful of how much your dietary composition is made up of that, if that makes sense.
This is one I'm making off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
What would if someone comes to you and their food is all over the place, they've got no structure with it whatsoever, maybe they do have some preconceived like attitudes towards carbs and stuff, what would your first 4 weeks look like with them with food?
It depends. Often the first things that I tend to do with a lot of clients is actually try and ask them why they're wanting to come and see me in the first place. Where do they maybe see themselves in 6 to 12 months? What is their kind of sticking points with nutrition so far? What's maybe worked for them and what hasn't before? And then kind of get them to tell me a wee bit about why they eat the way they eat. If I get a diet history from them and stuff like that, tell me a bit more about it, why they choose the foods that they do. And this is where, from a dietetic point of view, we look into things like their social history and stuff, because it's not just about, this is where diet has so much more, it's more just than about what you eat. There's so many other factors that can influence someone's intake. And often what I would do for the first part is go through, try and educate someone about how you make up, for example, like a healthy plate, a healthy snack, and see if we can try and get through some of the barriers there with what they do or don't understand about nutrients. And often one of the approaches I would tend to speak to clients about is think about what you can add into your diet as opposed to taking away. So a lot of people come in and thinking, I'm going to need to restrict this, this, and this. But most of the time it's thinking, okay, my meal is actually a wee bit short of, I don't know, carbohydrates, or it's maybe lacking in a bit of colour. I need to chuck something else in there. Same with maybe their snacks. Their snacks are where a lot of people think I shouldn't be snacking, but snacks is something that I often say they're like mini meals. And if you're active, you probably need them. So what can we do to add into a snack that is going to actually make you feel more like maybe full, keep you going a bit longer? What's going to give you more nutrients, and treat it as an opportunity to get nutrients in that hopefully maybe by the end of the day, your cravings for kind of the higher sugary foods I would hope won't be there just as much, because you're actually feeling yourself and giving your body what it needs, throughout the day, but still honouring cravings when you feel that you want them.
Do you
long-winded answer.
No, it's good. Do you get people to track often?
Again, it depends on the person. So I would say so many clients come into clinic and be like, I want a meal plan. And I think dietitians are, I don't know if I want to say 50-50 on this. Some dietitians are happy to give meal plans, but I would say the majority of us tend to just, I would give a meal plan to someone who, say they were training for a marathon and wanted to carb load for the next week or something. I would help organise their dietary intake for that week to be like, okay, I think you need to be eating X, Y, and Z to carb load appropriately for your big race or whatever you're doing. The majority of the time, I don't ever really give meal plans at all. I help them build a structure. So it could be that I take out the guesswork, obviously, of what the requirements and protein and all that is, and sometimes get them to maybe count like food groups up. So thinking to themselves, okay, you maybe roughly need to have, I don't know, 8 servings of complex carbohydrates a day. You maybe need to get 3 servings of protein a day. And how they make that up is up to them. But then I'll give them support and resources in and around that to help with that if they don't really know how to build a balanced plate or whatever else. So it takes away the calorie counting. It's just more thinking over the course of the day of, right, okay, my meal I almost have like a meal checklist that I give them. So think about adding a couple of portions of complex carbohydrates, some salad veggies or something, whatever that is, getting in some sort of source of protein in there somewhere, and then ticking off a dairy source a couple of times a day to get, or dairy or fortified like alternatives.
You've almost answered this question that I was going to ask next, but I just want to, some of this is maybe like selfish for myself.
Okay.
So as a coach, I'd be quite big on tracking just at the start, and it's purely so I can see what they're eating mostly.
Okay.
But I want to have something in place for not just people that are tracking's maybe not the right answer for them, but when maybe they get 12 weeks in and it's maybe someone that doesn't like, they don't really need to track anyway. Yeah. And like, I just don't really have something to give them to be like, right, here's like a wee sort of template, not like a template as in like eat this, this and this, just like some sort of structure. Like I think Jordan Syatt talks about like 3 meals and 2 snacks. Yep. And then he like goes into detail about the actual meals and like very vague, but enough to get them to stop stressing out. Do you have anything like that?
So that's me probably answering that last question probably from what I would do with someone in clinic, if you know what I mean. My approach to maybe someone from a PT point of view might differ a little bit. So if someone wants to come in from a coaching point of view, I would probably, most of the time I would say I choose not to encourage them to track unless I can really tell from maybe a couple of sessions with them that, do you know what, that might be the approach from them and there's no kind of like red flags that are coming up to me.
What is that, like maybe that there's no structure of their food or?
Yeah, or often it's not maybe so much tracking. I often just get them to write them down. So dietitians are really into like food diaries and stuff like that. So maybe it would be asking them to scribble it down on their notes on their phone, send me it. Or if not, it could be just them putting on a notepad, let me see it for a week and let me view that rather than, I know like popular apps are obviously very good are quite easy to put your intake in, but I think it takes away, I wonder how accurate people put it in. And I think that's where if you're maybe encouraged to write it down, you could maybe easily say it's 2 handfuls or, I don't know, it's a palm size portion of whatever. And I think that allows me to see a bit easier what they're having as opposed to them trying to put it in and be like, oh, I think that's roughly how much I've had. So I'm not a huge fan of putting stuff in tracking apps for the majority of clients. I would say there's a place for it, and sometimes it can be really helpful if I can guarantee that I know someone's going to track fairly honestly. But I find for me, food diaries
people don't like talking about that clients lie about stuff. I find a lot of coaches are like, nah, they don't lie, and I'm like, no, but it's not an attacking them thing.
No.
That's what it happens.
It's like white coat syndrome. That's like if someone was to come in and see me in clinic, I would guarantee that they would probably tell me that they're eating a bit better, the majority of people, until you maybe like quiz them a little bit more in a dietary assessment and be like, okay, actually your intake's that, because they've got the fear of being judged, and that's the sad thing. And
I don't know how often this happens for you, but probably 50% of people will apply and be like, I'm trying to lose weight. Yeah. I'm on 1,200 calories. But they're also not, but they also don't need to try 1,200 calories. But I worked with them for a week and I'm like, it's okay that you weren't.
Yeah.
But you weren't, and I'll educate you on, and I'll try to get them to eat around maintenance and stuff like that. What I do, I think that's why it matters so much about what's the support being given with those sort of things and what's the education being given with, like, so when I get people to track, I'm not trying to get them to hit a low goal. Yep. 99% of the time I've increased their goal by quite a lot, and I'm doing the opposite. I'm trying to work them up to a higher goal.
Yep.
And then also I educate them on like where they are sort of tracking wrong, and I'm purely coming at it so they can see what's in food, because some of it's liberating. They go, I never realised I was in that. And then even if I can do it for like 6 weeks, and they do, a lot of them gradually start falling off. But that, I treat that more as an education process, and also it's more of a increase in their food intake for the gym. That's the way I come at it, rather than like try to get you eat a low amount. I'm always the opposite. I'm trying to increase things, not take them down.
And I think that's a good approach to have. And I think
but I genuinely want what you're talking about. Like I just don't know how to portray that to someone yet.
I suppose maybe for me, I end up, like what you said earlier on, if when someone comes into the gym, I try and say to them, we might focus on nutrition a bit further down the line. Let's get you in and let me get to know you a bit better and stuff first. Let me see how your approach to your exercise and stuff is. Obviously you have really good discussions with folk when they're on the gym floor, and you learn more about them, and that's sometimes where I end up picking up whether kind of doing a little bit kind of a stricter approach maybe of getting them to track and stuff might be helpful, or whether it might not be. So I think it, like you said, it maybe really depends on the person, but I think for a lot of people, they don't have a calorie awareness. They don't know where calories come from. So that's where I think sometimes it can be really helpful from like you said, an educational point of view, of it might just help someone understand where it comes from. And that's where I think PTs are often put in a bit of a tricky position, because we're obviously usually there to train people in the gym. And I've talked to so many PT pals about this, that we're almost getting asked to do another job on the side of it. And it's not to grudge that, but that's not really what we went to go and do our courses and stuff in. And I think there's this big expectation from clients that we should be giving them a lot more, when actually, in my opinion, we maybe need to be like, that's actually not our remit. There's a limit that we can help you, but you maybe need to, and that's me taking my dietetic side of it out of it. But I would be wanting to encourage someone to come in for like a bigger assessment, so that I've got the time and invested in them, rather than just trying to talk to, like you said, it's not always appropriate on the gym floor to do it, but that's where the majority
just feels weird.
Does feel weird.
Would you have first breakfast?
I know.
You're like, I'm going to lift that.
I know when you're like, try and give your max effort there. Like it's so hard. So I think PTs are put in a very difficult position, because we're often the first port of call that people will see.
This was what I've been talking about. So I have a girl called Katie on quite a lot. You've probably got on with her. So she's big into therapy. She's got BPD. But we were talking about, when someone is in a bad place, usually pin it on their weight straight away, and like they might need therapy, might need all of this other sort of stuff, but there isn't access to many of those things, and probably the most accessible thing as a personal trainer. And because they've pinned all their problems on their weight, we are usually the first people they see. So we have they expect all of these different things to change, and really we should only be focusing on the gym, because that is our job. You don't get the PT course I had to unlearn most of the nutrition stuff anyway, like, because I had most of my research before would have been because I was overweight, like all the podcasts, all the studies or whatever, it would have been all mostly nutrition based. So I was quite glued up before I started the course, and I would read stuff and go, well, I'll have to I was writing the answer going, well, this is wrong. This is toxic. And that's what most people are like. Dale was really glued up before he started PTing as well, but the amount of people that probably just go, I like going to the gym, I'll just become a PT, and then they do that course and they're really getting thrown in the deep end. Where like these people are like wanting all these changes. It's a hard job, man.
And it is. And I don't think I've been coaching now for maybe 5 years, but was just doing it part-time until I've started to kind of make it like, I'm still part-time, but doing it more. And I don't think I fully appreciated until I came out, and I would say that I've got the time to invest more in my clients than what I probably did before when I was still doing it on top of my NHS work. But it is hard. And I think I was weirdly pleasantly surprised with the course that I did, that I felt that they gave you the health eating basics, which was good. But I think the trouble is that the clients expect more than that. And it's tricky because for me, even as a dietitian, I often say we need to go back to basics. That's where a lot of people just go wrong. But if they're coming into a gym environment and say they don't have a PT, a lot of the dietary opinions and things that are floating around a gym space, I would argue probably aren't the greatest in the first place, because a lot of people have their opinions on nutrition that might be wrong in the first place. And that's where I think PTs, if someone then does invest in someone, we are the first port of call, and we need to be that person that, you know, tries to encourage them to think about getting back to basics. How are you building up your balance plates and all that, where a lot of people don't have that knowledge in the first place.
Aye, try come at it, instead of like you've got these goals, try come at it like your goals to the next 4 to 6 weeks. Feel better.
Yeah.
Maybe some of that will be quite hard, but like think of the gym as like, it's not about an outcome. The outcome is you just doing something for yourself and feeling better again. Because that's why nobody hires a PT feeling class. Yeah. They go, here, I feel amazing. Yeah. I look at myself in the mirror, I'm like, I'm a bad bitch. Do you know what I mean? Then that's never the case, but that, like, we are trying to instill, like, you just want to feel good again. I have a few more questions. These are very, like, just for my own. Okay. So I've ran a bit in the past, like I'd done like a plan, but I just was faster than what I thought. So purely for my own ego. When I was doing a 5K plan, and it was quite intensive, and it was before I was doing a PT, and I might want to do it again. How would I like fuel up before like the longer runs? And also, if I was to say I would done a plan for like 10 weeks to do a faster time, how would my like last 2 days before my run, like how should I eat?
I would say it maybe depends on the length of the race and stuff that you're going to do.
5K.
So 5K, I would say, depending on how long it would take you to do it, but if averagely speaking, if it's usually for folk maybe around 30 minutes and stuff, you often
19.
What's that?
19,
decent.
Yeah,
I would say you don't often need to worry about how you feel during it, because it's fairly short. So from the fueling up point before that,
carb loading, that's what I don't fully understand.
So I think, again, depending on the race, I would argue that you probably need to focus more on carb loading if the race was going to be like a lot longer. Probably if you have the risk there of your fuel stores being depleted if you're not going to carb load up, you know, for a longer, you know, endurance event, if that makes sense. But I would say for a 5K, as long as you're making sure that your meals and snacks contain a source of carbohydrate throughout the week before, and you're also making sure that your pre-workout nutrition is kind of on point of making sure that you're taking a carb source in before you do it. What's your hydration and stuff like and things as well.
Now, what about, say I ran it at 12 and if I was eating in the morning? Because the reason I also ask is I'd done cross country in primary school.
Same.
I was
sucked.
This was height of fatness, terrible choice. About 4 stone overweight. I also got a massive bowl of just like plain pasta because I was like, I'll fuel up before this. But I had it like an hour before. Oof. I was nearly sick the full time. I think I was third last.
So this is maybe where like probably more processed carbohydrates then come into the mix. So as the further away you are from your exercise session, that's where you can afford to take kind of like your everyday carbohydrates, I would call them. So like your whole grain versions of your bread.
That's why you'd look at more the night before.
So for example, if you were going up to do like a race in the morning and stuff, I would be saying that you want to think about what your carb intake's like at your kind of lunch and evening meal the day before, or maybe your supper snack as well. And then if you were getting up and kind of racing early doors, you would, if you probably on a race day, you would maybe be up early enough anyway to try and get some sort of like decent fuel on board, maybe like 3 to 4 hours beforehand of you being your last like substantial meal. And then the closer you get, the more processed your carbohydrates kind of need to be. So it could be that you end up dropping like the amount of fiber and fat that you get from them, because they both slow down the digestion. So this is probably where having a big massive bowl of pasta probably wasn't like a great idea, because the volume was probably too high, or if it was the whole grain version of it, you can't digest that quick enough in order for your muscles or your blood to get that energy cycling through for your muscles to use, if that makes sense. So the closer you get, the more easily digestible your carbohydrates need to be. Okay.
Last question, because some of these are just cropping up. Okay. Would you do anything like that for a podcast or something that you're going to have to intensely concentrate on? Would you ever eat accordingly to that? Do you ever think about things like that?
A really good question. So often something that I speak to a lot of clients about is fueling to perform. And that sounds really cheesy, but if you think about it, we perform in every day like tasks that we do, whether it's, I don't know, at work, you know, as a parent, just in relationships, whatever. And when I say fuel to perform, a lot of people just automatically think, oh, it's me trying to, you know, do heavier in the gym or whatever and get fitter. But a lot of the time it's actually to do with a lot more than that. So if you're not fueling yourself well enough for your day-to-day activities, then you're probably going to feel that you lack in concentration. You don't have the energy to get through the rest of your day. So yeah, I would say that for the most part, I am now definitely thinking of an approach of like a fueled mindset. How can I fuel my active day when I feel like I'm a busy person, enjoy training, whatever else, that each of my meals and snacks need to be giving me the energy that I need to support my active lifestyle in and around my training as well.
Good stuff. Because I had a few clients in intermittent fasting and they were like, but I'm not working.
Okay.
Not working out in the morning and my job's not physical. And I was like, but I'm very mentally like draining the job. And if you don't eat, like how much do you buy that you can concentrate more when you fast?
Don't buy it.
You don't buy it?
No.
Right, we will definitely end on this, but I want to hear
No,
that.
yeah.
Because I didn't feel any of that. And I'd done it for like 4 weeks, maybe like long time ago.
Yeah.
And it would be, with the knowledge I have now, it'd be different me trying it and like really knowing what was going on, like, because I'm self-aware or whatever.
Yeah.
But when people say stuff like that, I know placebo can be, it's still, placebo is placebo, placebo is placebo, it still works, but I just don't really.
So I think first things first probably about intermittent fasting is that I would say that nutrition is individualized. If intermittent fasting works for one person, like fine. As a dietitian, we would need to support someone through that, but again, give them the advice that would help them to make more informed choices about their health. For me, I just always think that I think a lot of people come in thinking that intermittent fasting is this magic approach to eating that's going to make them like lose weight quicker, feel better, whatever. There is no difference.
That's due to the internet, isn't it?
And I mean, there's so many different approaches to it, like the 5-2, 16-8, you know, there's loads of different ways. And I would say what attracts a lot of people to it is that they're essentially not having to cut any foods out. It's not asking them to restrict a certain food or anything. It's just changing the pattern in which they eat, which can be appealing to a lot of people. But evidence time and time again comes up to say that if you match the calories that you take on an intermittent fasting day to the calories that you would take if you were just put on a prescribed like energy deficit, then the fat loss is exactly the same. So again, it comes down to your overall calorie intake at the end of the day. It's just an approach that you could maybe use to eat less. And all it's doing is just restricting your eating window. So the concern that I would say I have from a fuel to perform side of things is that it's not teaching you how to eat any better, really, because it's not looking at what your diet quality is like. How is it fueling your active day? And there's actually research that's come out as well that from an we've not spoke so much about like under fueling.
I've seen you write posts about this, so you can fire on that.
Yeah, so it's an area that
I wanted you to explain because there was an acronym you used there as well, because you said under fuel. I'm not good with like, I don't even know what an acronym really is. Do you know what? I'm not good with those.
I'm trying to think what I maybe was it like low energy availability?
Yeah,
was it that?
What's that? Is that an acronym?
Yeah, so I've often would be like, yeah, that's it, that's you.
Language
so
teacher will be proud.
LEA is often like what it's kind of acronymed at. But yeah, it's an area that I would say I'm really... We had such
an intelligent conversation until
I know. Yeah, I would say it's an area that I am really passionate about. I think from day-to-day athletes that aren't like fueling enough.
Do you think this applies to intermittent fasting? Because we kind of jumped to that.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was going to go and say is that for a lot of people that aren't eating enough, people just think that it's actually the impact that that's having on their health. So like hormone levels and all of that is only from an overall reduced energy intake. But there was a study done, I can't remember how long ago it was, but there's been a study that has come out to show that even if you, for example, fast in the morning and then train and you're not eating for a period of time in and around that, your hormone levels are actually affected by shorter periods of fasting. It's not just from a prolonged period of a reduced energy intake, if that makes sense. It's actually from a day-to-day point of view, your hormones are affected by how much you eat in and around like exercise, for example, or how long you go on a daily basis. So that's,
do you mean like maybe when you're fasting, like cortisol and stuff can maybe be rising and stuff?
So from if you went
and do you mean like the like hunger hormone and satiety hormone, like they're all
even like hormone levels, like for example, for a lot of females, if they are not eating enough over a prolonged period of time, their hormone levels of things like estrogen and things go down, they might lose their menstrual cycle, all that kind of stuff. And not that for like one day of eating less, that's not going to have a big impact, but if it's something that you're doing recurrently on a regular basis of, for example, fasted training and things like that, you're putting your body potentially under more stress by training in that fasted state and not having the fuel in there to actually support the stress exercise that you're about to do. And we've seen that hormone levels can actually be affected by just day-to-day longer periods of restriction, which isn't great. So that's where, for me, I'm someone that definitely says that I would never encourage someone to do fasted training. And a topic that I would say comes up with clients all the time is, I come in and train like first thing in the morning, and I'm like, it's okay, me too. And I would definitely say that I was someone that loved fasted training when I was younger and had no idea the effects that it would probably have, and just thinking that must be better for me. But I think we all have, so we every day probably have to eat at particular times where maybe we don't want to. And that's the discussions that I often have with clients, is that in the morning, you might not have much of an appetite, but your capacity to eat, there'll be something that you can take, and getting something on board is far better than getting nothing on board, and then your tolerance can increase like over time.
I wonder if things come in waves, because they've been having the things that are cropping up for me, like that with main clients, one about 4 times this week.
Really,
I've said to people, it's not all about hunger cues.
Yep.
Like sometimes you just need to eat because you got something coming up.
Yep.
Just not like, I don't know how true this statement is, but I was like, sometimes your food routine is more important than your hunger cues.
Yeah. I think when there's been a background of dieting as well, for a lot of people, when they've just been calorie tracking, macro tracking, whatever for a period of time, that's all been like external cues that people have used for so long to say when they should eat or not. And I think we've been so used to, if people have done that for a period of time, they've totally got out of tune of what their hunger and fullness cues are. And I think that's where a lot of work sometimes needs to be done when someone wants to step away from dieting, is actually trusting that again, which can't happen overnight. But often what I like explain to people as well is, when you're ready to go to sleep or when you're ready to go to the toilet, your body's got cues there that tells you that that's what you need to do. It's exactly the same for hunger and like fullness. Our body tells us that, we've got systems in our body that actually tells us when we need to eat. But I think for so many people, when they've been overly restricting for so long or tracking, it's all been external cues, and people have just lost that way of actually eating when they potentially need to. Do you know?
If you've got another 5 minutes, because you keep saying stuff now.
Sorry.
But you're absolutely,
give me a short answer.
No, because the way you're explaining it's so simple. And I know it's going to be easy to understand. Yeah. And right, I want you, can you explain if there's any benefit to intuitive eating then, based off of that? And then the next one I want to go into is metabolism, because that's something that gets thrown around and really misunderstood as well.
So I definitely say that there's a space for intuitive eating, and I think it's getting a bit of a bad rap, I think, sometimes in the media, that a lot of people think that if they just were to intuitively eat, that they would then go out of control. But I think what it often comes back down to is actually maybe that hunger and fullness cues that a lot of people have lost over time. And it's not that, you can go and kind of do extra courses to be like an intuitive eating dietitian that promotes that kind of approach, which isn't something that I've done. But a lot of the things that we would encourage folk to do if I was to get a client into clinic would be to do with that, if they've had a background of like yo-yo dieting and things. And that's a lot of the things that I would encourage folk to think about first. When you are about to have something to eat, are you actually eating because you're feeling physically like hungry, or how long are you leaving it until you're ready to eat? So there's a definite space for that, and I think it's just had a bit of a bad reputation in the media by, I don't know, people maybe that have a misunderstanding of how it should be used. And it is just trying to get
like fasting as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just trying to get people back to that idea of, trusting your body again. And it's okay to eat when you're actually hungry. Because I think the dieting culture's had us thinking that I mean, I don't know how many clients I would say have also said to me, oh, when I'm feeling hungry, like to try and stop me eating, I might just go out a walk or like have a glass of water, and I'm like, but your body's telling you you're needing something to eat.
That's my little, like, that's quite common. People I just keep busy.
I know. And I mean, but again, if you're busy, your hunger, the way your body works is that your hunger cues will go up obviously with the more active that you are, which is like normal. So I think there's an element of teaching people again that you shouldn't ignore that, but it's then if people have ignored it, the natural response of then when you then get to a point of where you're extremely hungry is then going to be that you're going to try and eat everything because you're that hungry, which is a total natural response. And then it feeds into that cycle again of, oh, maybe I should track again because I've just totally went out of control. But
and no, it's kind of guilt and shame cycle starts as well.
But that approach has probably predicted that in the first place because you left yourself going for so long without having anything to eat when your body was actually saying you need to have something to eat. So yeah, I would say intuitive eating's got a real place for it, that a lot of people need to try and tune into that.
Okay, I don't know how to fully word this, but you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Can you explain the difference between like your metabolism adapting from chronically dieting all the time and also people saying it's damaged, as if that's like factual? And also, can you explain maybe how people go about fixing that and like how much truth is there to like reverse dieting, etc.? And like, I'm not coming at this with any bias or anything. Yeah. I just want to know your thoughts on all of it.
I wouldn't say that your metabolism is naturally going to change. How much you metabolize your food is going to change depending on what your weight is and how much fuel and stuff that you're actually giving your body. So yes and no, but I would say that over time it's not going to be damaged. Your metabolism is going to alter depending on the food and the fuel that you're going to give it. And I think the issue in and around that is that people think from years of yo-yo dieting that their metabolism is out the shot. It's not. It's just that we need to maybe take it back to what you should actually technically be eating, and your body's a smart thing. It's going to deal with the food that you then give it appropriately. So it's not that you're going to do long-term damage. It's more that we need to think about your approach to nutrition in the first place has just been wrong and probably hasn't worked for you because you've just been on this yo-yo cycle of, potentially either binge eating or eating too much and then going into huge periods of over restriction. And I think that's the issue sometimes with the reverse diet, and if that was like the next part of that, is that for me, if I was to take someone through like a fat loss phase, I would almost be encouraging them to be in a very calorie deficit. I mean, again, it depends on what goal someone has. If they have a bit of a time frame, obviously there's levels of a calorie deficit that you can put someone in. For me, I would always say what is going to be sustainable and what are you likely going to stick to for the long run. So you want to get that kind of sweet spot of where, yes, there might be an element of hunger because you are putting yourself into a deficit and your body's almost like, that's a natural reaction to you giving it less food. But you want to be having that sweet spot of where you think that it's something that I can manage, like, okay, and it might be something that you have to do for, I don't know, periods of maybe like 4 to 6 weeks or something, maybe a bit longer. And then I would be say, okay, let's take a bit of like a break from it and stuff here, especially if you're starting to get tired from it, and maybe sit at like what we call it maintenance calories and stuff for like a bit and then go back into it and stuff then, just to give someone a break. Because I think your body is under stress in a calorie deficit, and that's what we need to remember, that we shouldn't be in a calorie deficit for months and months. It's not good for us.
There's one thing I could get into people's heads, it's that it's a phase.
100%, yeah.
And it should be short.
Yeah. And I think that's the sad thing, is that I think a lot of people are just of this idea that they always need to be in a calorie deficit of some way, or they're trying to compensate for when they've restricted so much during the week, they then overeat at the weekend and then restrict again that much, and it's just that constant cycle. And yeah, it's sad.
We'll leave it there, but that was class, and that you absolutely smashed that. But it didn't end up being quick fire. But
oh no, sorry, I'm bad for that.
Pretty long fire, but it was good. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is with any sort of approach, and it's maybe something that I would say to clients, is like, or anyone, you're gonna have to like. You can't just listen to this podcast and go away. It's like going to have to be a continual journey, and educate yourself as you go through the journey. Yeah. Like, don't stop listening to podcasts. And I think that's how I done it. Mm-hmm. I think I just even though there's a mental masturbation aspect that everyone goes on about, but that's more with the self-help stuff. I think you can mentally masturbate with this nutrition stuff. I think you can keep learning, and then as long as you're like doing something, because intuitive eating might work for you, but if I just tell you with no knowledge whatsoever, go and intuitively eat, it won't work.
Yeah, and that's even what I said earlier on, that nutrition should always be like individualized. One approach that I do with one person isn't going to be the same for someone else. I think the risky thing is that there's so much misinformation out there just now, and so many, like, anyone could call themselves a nutritionist, and they could have done like a day's course and been like, yeah, I know how to guide you on food. And it's the tricky thing is that people don't maybe know where to get their information from. So it's trying to make sure that wherever you are like listening to podcasts and stuff from, that it's hopefully with like a reputable source. But this is a really good way to get, you know, when you maybe you can't get access at your GP, or you can't get access to private healthcare and stuff, which I know is a luxury for, you know, a privilege for a lot of people, but this might be a really good way to start learning.
Where can people find you, and like, can you buy your book?
Yep.
So just on your Instagram?
Yeah.
I'll put a link to that. So you've got explain the book and then just give your Instagram handle and then we'll end it now.
So you can find me at Kerri Major _dietitian. Nice and easy to find. And I'm kind of most active on Instagram. I also have a like TikTok that's a bit stagnant sometimes, and then and then the book link and all that's on there as well. And it was just something that I had a really fortunate opportunity to write a couple of years ago, and should give people the basics of nutrition again, so that it hopefully clears the air of a lot of misinformation that's out there just now, encourages people how to build up a balanced plate. It's got recipes and stuff in there as well, that it's often the way I described it before was often this almost like a little handbook Bible that you could refer to if you were just like, my God, I'm overwhelmed, and it hopefully will help someone make more informed choices about their nutrition.
Class. Thank you very much.
That's all. Thanks for having me.
Unreal.